Chapter 7. Chapter 7. It took the town only 2 days to respond to the Interflux communication. The letter came through Wendy, who delivered it directly to Simon, saying, "Hey, sleazebag, take this and choke on it. It's for you." Simon was beginning to have very serious doubts about his chances with Wendy. "Dear Ms. Orr, we appreciate your reply of the day before yesterday, yet there are a number of questions that we feel need answering, particularly those regarding I, Simon. Mr. Simon purchased the land, yet his name appears nowhere in your letter. To us, this seems a rather strange omission. We await your explanation. Yours truly, F. Van Doren, Mayor." "The nerve of that guy!" Phil exploded. "We ought to tell him where he heads into. Dear Mr. Mayor, you want to know who I, Simon is? We'll tell you who I, Simon is. None of your business, that's who I, Simon is." That wasn't too far from what the program board actually did send to the mayor, which was a politely worded letter reminding the town of Greenbush of Interflux's lawful claim to 1346B, and pointing out the fact that it therefore didn't make a particle of difference who I, Simon was. He was Interflux's old purchasing agent and had been replaced. "It's not dishonest," Simon said earnestly. "I, Simon, was replaced by Simon Irving, right when I had my records changed." Interflux was baffled. In its history, the company had dealt with every kind of lunatic, environmentalist, and profiteer, and yet here was something completely different. A student council that demanded nothing, would speak to no one, and declared only its intention of being a bad neighbor. On top of this, the bean diet raged mercilessly on and showed all the potential of being the most destructive marathon in the Irving family history. With unpleasantness both at home and at work, Mr. Irving spent an increasing amount of time at the Fosterville Country Club, and Simon often went with him. Mr. Irving felt father and son time took his mind off his problems, for the poor man had no way of knowing that his son was his problems. "Boy, Dad," gasped Simon after his father had wiped up the court with him at squash, "you were a madman out there, unbeatable." "I'm working off some frustration, son. I'm paying work crews to sit on their—" "No, I refuse to talk about it. That's the whole point of coming here. I'm going to relax if it kills me." The two began to walk towards the changing room. "What time do we have to be back for dinner?" Simon asked. "Thanks a lot, kid. That's the other thing I'm trying not to think about." "Remember steak?" "I do." Slapped his knee with determination. "I'm going to have one tonight. We're going to find the best restaurant in town and order us a couple of slabs of meat you can hardly see over. I'll go call your mother." He was so enthused by this idea that he rushed right to find a phone. When he returned, he was totally cast down. "The bean casserole is already in the oven." Simon drove home while his father sat in the passenger seat complaining. "It gets worse and worse. Interflux yesterday, bean casserole today. Who knows what's next? It's not worth my while getting up in the morning. Do you know where the flake spent the night last night? In the Kathmandu City Jail. One of his idiot friends dared him to ski down Mount Everest in the nude. They had a drink writing on it. The New York Post called me for comment. Take it easy, Dad." The following Monday, Mayor Van Doren made another trip to the Interflux to find out his opinions on the progress of the Interflux situation. There he learned that he had decided to discuss Interflux with the Nassau Arts Administration and see if he could make some headway. The top administration people at Nassau Arts had their offices in an area of the basement known by one and all as the Dungeon. It was to this suite that the mayor was conducted that afternoon, only to be requested to leave 20 minutes later after he referred to the Student Council Program Board as a pain in the butt. He did come away with one piece of information, however. The administration refused to interfere with the spending of the Student Council budget, even if that budget was spent buying land. The dungeon, though, decided to follow up on this and sent for Wendy Orr. She claimed no responsibility for Interflux and put them on to Simon Irving. Thus, on Tuesday morning, Simon found a note on his locker requesting him to report to the dungeon at his earliest convenience. "Look," Sam pleaded, "you don't go to the dungeon without your agent." Simon shook his head. "I don't know. I don't think I buy this agent stuff. I can speak for myself." "You don't understand. This is the dungeon. This isn't just anything. They say the last student issue that it went all the way to the dungeon was when Nathan first began Omni and needed the go-ahead from the top. That's history in this place. And even then, Nathan Krupman took T.C. Surratt with him for the meeting. Now, T.C. and Philip are practically brothers this week. Philip could get him to drop everything and see you right now." They found Phil, but Simon was still not convinced that TC was the route for him. "Wait a minute," Phil pointed out. "This dungeon thing concerns the whole program board. We have to take a vote. I vote yes, Sotrius votes with me, all opposed, blah blah blah, motion carried. Come on, let's see TC before class." "All right," Simon conceded, "but I want you to know I'm only doing this to get you off my back." "TC's the greatest," Simon raved after the meetings were over. "Everyone should have an agent. This is the 20th century after all." "Come on," said Sam. "Tell us what happened." "TC was amazing. He knew everything, and he answered all the questions perfectly. And he only charged me 2 days, and he spoke so well. And yeah, Phil insisted. "What about the dungeon guys? What did they say?" Simon shrugged. They just wanted to make sure we're not crooks or anything. They're not going to interfere so long as we don't break any laws and don't get any bad publicity for the school." "Are you sure?" asked Simon seriously. "What kind of question is that?" snapped Phil. "Of course he's sure. These dungeon guys must be really cool. Mr. Brownlee would have had us bazookaed. He ran Greenbush High like a concentration camp." "Honestly, Sam," said Simon, "there's nothing to worry about. These people sincerely believe in the students' right to handle their own affairs." "So we were lucky," said Sam, "this time." Phil was of a different opinion. "It's destiny, really. I mean, Interflux comes up against the most impossible obstacles, but she always pulls through. I'm starting to have a lot of faith here." Sam made a face. Work was now coming up for examination regularly in painting class, and Simon found that he was learning a lot. He was impressed with the talent of his fellow students, but no less pleased with his tavern scene, which was now finished. Karada continued to be a one-man show. "Saturday at the beach. Mr. Stavridis, you and I both know there are no camels at a public beach. Yet you, Mr. Stavridis, you very annoying person, have put 3 camels into this picture." He turned his eyes pleadingly up to heaven. "Why, oh great organizing principle of the universe, must I suffer with this idiot who chooses to throw away his talent and make garbage?" He shook his head, snorting like a horse. I look in the change booth in the background. A camel! There, printed on this child's beach ball. A camel! And this baby in the surf is playing with a little plastic camel! "You missed the one reflected in the sunglasses of the lady in the red bikini," Sam said mildly. Simon held his breath, expecting an explosion. But the artist simply walked quietly back to his seat, and without uttering a sound, overturned his heavy oak desk so quickly that the whole process was complete in a fraction of a second. Simon missed it all in the space of a single sneeze, but there was the wreckage, undeniable proof. The desk was on its side, and dozens of papers were still airborne, settling over the battlefield. "Mr. Stavridis, when I was teaching at the University of Copenhagen, a colleague of mine had a very talented student who thought it was amusing to paint an escaped convict in every crowd scene. Every piece of work, there he was, a little man in a striped suit hiding. my colleague finally went berserk and ran his student over with a mobile home. Karada does not own a mobile home. He walked across the room and bent down so that his eyes were an inch and a half from Sam's. But I can rent one! No more cameras! He turned to the rest of the class, back to normal once again. That's all the work handed into me. Does anybody else have something to present? Simon raised his hand. I've got a painting finished. There was an uncomfortable pause, so he added, Do you want me to bring it up to the front? The artist glared at him pityingly. Mr. Simon, have I ever told you the story of the young artist who asked stupid questions? Simon flushed. Yes, sir, you have. Karada stomped on the floor. Then set up your picture! Simon was trembling as he placed his canvas on the display stand, but as he stepped back and viewed his tavern scene, all his old confidence returned, and he cast this teacher a look of cautious triumph. Karada stared at the painting for a long time, cocking his head, stepping back, moving forward, and snapping silence at the slightest shuffling noise of or squeak of a chair. For 10 full minutes, the class waited while he examined tavern scene. Then he began to point out every single flaw on the entire canvas with such nitpicking precision that Simon could only stare in mute shock as his image of perfection was dashed to pieces. He could almost see the Vishnik prize, his passport to freedom from Interflux, sprouting white fluffy wings and flying away from him until it was only a tiny speck above the smokestacks on the horizon. The torture didn't end quickly. After Karada finished his lengthy list of faults, he called the class up to gather around the painting and get a look at these flaws up close. By the time the period ended, Simon was so down that a future in his father's office counting zipper teeth was beginning to look bright. Then something strange happened. Before leaving the room, several of his classmates came over to Simon and congratulated him on the success of Tavern Scene. Simon was completely mystified. Man, I've never seen Karada like a painting so much, said Peter Ashley, shaking his head. He cut me up for 45 minutes, Simon blurted out. 45 minutes of attention from Karada, said Laura dreamily. I've never seen that before. I don't get it, Simon said to Sam later. I took 5 times as much abuse as anybody else. Why are people congratulating me? Are you kidding? Sometimes I think you'll never adjust. That's the greatest honor Karada could give you. He loved that painting. Yeah, sure, said Simon sarcastically. You only made up that part about every single bit of it being wrong so I wouldn't get a swelled head. I could just go home and take it easy and they'll mail me the Vishnik prize. I bet Karada feels that if you rework that painting, you've got a good shot at the Vishnik prize. You've got it made. You could coast on this picture all semester. Forget it, said Simon determinedly. I'm not submitting a picture worth 45 minutes of flaws. I'm going to do so much better that 9-foot crackpot won't think of a single thing to say. Not one. Although nothing much had happened, for some reason Interflux went big time in the school halls that week. Simon found that practically everybody knew him, and now he received full credit from all as the architect of Interflux's master plan. It was not as much credit, he noticed a little sourly, as Sam Renata seemed to get for his substantially smaller part in the affair. Nor did it appear to be enough to merit him a role in Nathan's movie, not that he wanted one, and it certainly wasn't enough to earn him anything more promising than a passing snarl from Wendy Orr. She shot you with a fire extinguisher, Phil protested when Simon told him and Sam about his feelings for Wendy. Yeah, but she looks so good doing it. Love is blind, said Sam wearily, not to mention stupid, dumb, and deaf. Man, I'd never get involved with the girl who shot me with a fire extinguisher, Phil stated positively. I've got a list in my mind of things I will just not take from women, and that's on it. Speaking of women, Sam said casually, concentrating on the far wall rather than his two friends. And I'm not so sure about this, so it might sound stupid, but I'm beginning to get the vague impression that that girl Barbara might kind of like me. Simon looked at Phil in exasperation. Well, it sure doesn't take a brick building to fall on him. Of course she likes you, you idiot, Phil exploded. Everyone in the building knows it. Why don't you? Sam shuffled uncomfortably. Well, I was sort of noticing, but she's so good looking and so popular, I figured, what'd you want with me? Phil snorted in disgust. There are times when I hate you, you know that? Now listen very carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. Barbara, along with every other female this side of Montauk Point, thinks you're the greatest thing since the invention of the wheel. Look how they all chase you. Oh, come on. They just like me as, a friend. Phil was screaming now. You're so stupid! Look, just ask her out, okay? To make me happy, okay? I think I'll just let it slide and see what happens, Sam decided. If things look good in a little while, maybe I'll ask her out. Phil said later as he and Simon checked out T.C. Surratt's accommodation schedule in front of locker 0750. Sometimes that Sotrius ticks me off so much. If we weren't friends from childhood, I'd take the wreck and run him over. If you remember to put gas in the tank. They wasted that face on him, man. They could have given it to me. Simon examined the sheet. TC's not coming to my place for a while yet. Phil snorted. That's because he's spending all his time in my basement. If this keeps up, my mother's gonna throw me out and adopt him. In math class, the homework pool was working like a charm. Its membership now stood at 6, and the only drawback in the whole scheme of things was that Phil, who was not living up to his potential in math either, was making mistakes that were ultimately duplicated 5 times. No one had the heart to throw him out, though, since this was, after all, his pool. I'm getting the math all right, explained. It's the numbers that are fouling me up. The math and the numbers are the same thing, said Bill McIntosh, as he threatened in a friendly way to slam dunk Phil's face if his accuracy didn't improve. Phil's new big thing, of course, was photography. He was working very hard at setting up a portfolio good enough to buy him some tenure in the department. He had mastered the darkroom quite well, but his sense of composition was getting a lot of unwelcome attention from the teacher, Mr. Floyd. His best picture to date was a portrait of his mother. However, in that shot, a plant on the table behind her chair was positioned so unluckily that its leaves appeared to be sprouting from her ears. In addition to these troubles, there was a problem with equipment, more specifically, tripods. Whenever Phil signed out a tripod, it would break before he had a chance to return it. It's not my fault, honestly, he complained. It's just bad luck. I always get the ones that are hanging by a thread, so when I try to use them, they fall apart. Why don't you try checking them out before you sign them out? Sam suggested. Well, I do, but there must be, hidden defects. Mr. Floyd is really sore, so he gets on my case a lot. Photography can be a drag sometimes. The only class Simon seemed to be having no problem with at all was design and composition. This, the teacher informed him, just in case he was considering feeling pride in his A average, was typical of all the Karate students. That week, Xerxes Buzz Durham banned all typewriters, insisting that he had just discovered they were the worst offenders against psychic growth. Poor Dina, who had all his essays typed by Dina, had neglected to mention to her that penmanship was the new order of the day. Mr. Durham, who held fast behind his convictions, changeable though they were, rejected Dino's latest paper outright. Biology class was way behind schedule because Miss Glandfield spent so much of her time and energy out at the Interflux land on patrol to make sure that Interflux didn't try to sneak any trucks through. This vigil was so absorbing that she would often forget to come to class. When Simon walked into the lab on Wednesday and found her there, it was the first he'd seen of her in quite a while. Even more surprising was the reaction he got from Johnny Zoll. "Man, I've been hearing a lot of really heavy-duty things about you lately." "What things?" Simon asked suspiciously. "Interflux, man. All about how you're running it, and how the whole thing was your idea, and how you guys are kicking Interflux upside the head. I'm proud of you, dude. And you know what I said to those people when they told me all the great things you've been doing? I said, that's my lab partner. And boy, were they impressed. Man, I knew I'd be a good influence on you. Interflux is the worst example of the Long Island establishment. Throwing mud balls at them goes with everything I've ever stood for. Although I never understand how you managed to organize this and keep it from your lab partner." He shook his head. "Sure, I've been hearing stuff about Simon Irving, but I always thought Irving was your first name. And anyway, I didn't make the connection until now. Man, I can't wait for you to meet the guys." "The guys?" "Yeah, the guys, Outer Nimrod. I told them all about you on the phone. They asked if they could meet you, and I said I could swing that, us being lab partners and all. Ooh, I guess I spilled the beans and ruined the surprise." "The surprise," Simon repeated, his heart preparing to sink. "I'm taking you to our gig Friday night as my personal guest. You'll love this club we're playing. It's one of the classiest places in New York." Friday night, said Simon, trying desperately to come up with a previous engagement. Johnny looked at him, his face earnest and concerned. "You can make it, can't you, Simon?" Simon sighed. "Of course. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Thanks for inviting me." "Hey, no problem. Lab partners always pull together." "Right." On Friday night, while Phil traveled with a Nathan Krutman video crew to Staten Island to film the first moonwalk, Simon rode in on the Long Island Railroad with Johnny Zoll and his favorite guitar. Their destination? Scuzz, a tiny club located below an all-night drugstore in Manhattan's Lower East Side. Simon was prepared to see a dilapidated old neighborhood, but he never in his wildest nightmares envisioned anything like Scuzz. "Doesn't it just blow you away?" asked Johnny, breathing deeply, as though he had just walked into a garden of hyacinths. "Is it safe?" asked Johnny. "Absolutely not," said Johnny with reverence. "What?" "Well, that's the whole point. The building was condemned in 73, but Louis, he's the owner, somehow managed to save it. What a break!" Simon had a brief, giddy vision of a New York Post headline, "Flux Boss's Son Murdered in Slum Brawl." He felt like running away, but remembered that the only thing worse than being in this neighborhood was being in this neighborhood alone. The other members of Outer Nimrod were older than Johnny, ranging from 19 to 22, but they may as well have been cloned from the same master cell. All were welcoming and friendly, and none of them could seem to get over the group's amazing luck in getting themselves a booking at Scuzz. Besides Johnny, Outer Nimrod was made up of Neb, Ig, and Frida. Frida was the lead singer and looked about as much like a Frida as Scuzz looked like a club. He was a 275-pound part-time wrestler with a ring in his nose and enough chest hair to stuff a queen-size mattress. With Neb on drums, Ig on bass, and Johnny Zoll on lead guitar, Outer Nimrod was a group formidable enough to face the Friday night crowd at Scuzz, a collection of fans who looked and smelled like cave people. Simon, who had been somewhat prepared for this by Johnny's tall tales, which he now believed 100%, selected a table which he felt would be good for hiding under, just in case things got a little out of hand. But the club filled up quickly, as Scuzz was famous for standing room only Friday nights, and he was joined by two Neanderthal identical twins with arms like tree trunks, each of whom drank 8 beers before even sitting down. In all fairness, Simon had to admit that they were friendly and tried to involve him in their conversation about crowbars. He sat listening to them for 40 minutes and watching in awe as they ordered beer by what was called the Octo, 8 mugs of draft. At around 20 after 11, the owner, Louis, decided the bar receipts had reached his Friday night quota, and he came on stage and said, "Now a bunch of guys are going to come out here and play music." Frida led Outer Nimrod onto the stage, grabbed the microphone, and bellowed, "We're Outer Nimrod and I'm Frida! Anybody want to make something out of it?" At Simon's table, one Neanderthal nudged up the other. "Hey, these guys got potential. Order us up another couple of octos." Frida seemed disappointed that no one chose to challenge him. "Okay, let's do stuff." Outer Nimrod exploded into a cacophony of the heaviest of metal, the brashest of hardcore, and the unmistakable sound of Europe-bound 747s revving their engines. Johnny Zoll was spectacular, creating most of the sound, passing his hand over the guitar strings as though by instinct, while Frida shrieked in a voice that was nothing short of bone-chilling. The Scuzz crowd, obviously a discriminating group of individuals, savored the opening number but like wine tasters, reserving judgment until the full bouquet could be experienced. The two Neanderthals were nodding at each other in appreciation, all the while putting away octos like it was going out of style. But then the great Jonathan Zulanovich stepped up to the front of the stage and began his patented guitar solo, calling on all his classical training, intricate knowledge of excruciating noise, showmanship, and every last single watt the club's amplifiers could deliver. Simon goggled. Johnny Zoll was the greatest guitarist in the world, alternately making his instrument scream, cry, laugh, and moan in rapid succession, all at a decibel level way above tolerance. He was incredible. Spontaneously, Simon leaped to his feet to lead the cheers and applause for his lab partner, not realizing the symbolic view of his gesture. To a Scuzz crowd, looking at the world through a haze of too many octos, the first person to rise was the traditional starter of the fight. Simon was never sure afterwards which Neanderthal lunged at him first, but it wasn't important, as they both hit within a fraction of a second of each other, sandwiching him and knocking the wind out of him so completely that he collapsed to the floor gasping. This turned out to be a genuine stroke of luck, since at eye level, fists were soon flying in all directions, and on the floor, he had only to worry about being stomped on. Within seconds, the brawl encompassed the whole club, and Simon crawled on his hands and knees behind the overturned table. Outer Nimrod played on, encouraged by this show of appreciation. Simon got up to the nerve to peer out from behind the table, and found himself staring right into the eyes of one of the Neanderthals, who luckily couldn't get at him, since he was being held in a headlock by a girl with blue hair. "Hey man," croaked the twin, "why aren't you fighting? Don't you like the music?" Quickly, Simon ducked back down again, cursing the fate that had brought him to be lab partners with Johnny Zoll. Mr. and Mrs. Irving sat in front of the late movie that night, eating celery sticks with low-cal bean dip, the recipe for which had appeared in that morning in the Sun. Mr. Irving was concentrating hard on pretending they were potato chips, sometimes holding his breath to weaken the taste. "I wonder if Simon is having fun tonight," he announced suddenly. "I hope not. I hope all of Interflux isn't having fun tonight. I hope Interflux never has fun, and Simon, has the least fun of all." "Cyril," protested his wife, "it's the weekend." "I have no weekend. I have Interflux," he grimaced. The party none of this would have happened if the flake hadn't decided that he needed a complex. We figured we'd get him off our backs for a while, so we sent him to this big international convention. But he just came back, looked at me with those big stupid blue eyes of his, and said, "Cyril, how come we don't have a complex?" So I explained to him our decentralized production scheme, and he said, "The guy from Hypertech showed us pictures of all these great, big, beautiful complexes, just like whole cities. Cyril, we have more money than Hypertech. We should have at least one complex." So we showed up at a board meeting, and everyone was so thrilled to see him there with his pants on for a change that they were willing to promise him anything. He threw his arms up, almost overturning the bean dip. "Okay, I figured we'd get away with just changing the name of this place from Greenbush Plant to Greenbush Complex, and maybe put an addition on the cafeteria or something. But no! You know what the flake thinks the key ingredient of a complex is? Please, Cyril, a monorail! Could you believe it? We have to build this monstrosity and reroute business to make it useful so he can ride the monorail. And finally, after months of planning and preparation so that this complex really will benefit the company, a bunch of snotty, stuck-up artistic high school kids won't let me build it. Ms. Irving spoke up. "Please don't say that kind of thing in front of Simon. He's very happy at Nassau Arts. He has friends and he's fitting in beautifully." "Everything about that school rubs me the wrong way. I don't go for this painting in high school. I mean, I think it's great the boy has a hobby, but there comes a point where a young man should make something of himself like I did. What's he got against Abercrombie Prep?" "Nothing, dear. It's just that he's so talented that he deserves his chance to make painting a career." "Painting isn't a career. There's a future for him in Interflux. That's a career." "But he doesn't want it," she insisted. "Now, maybe you're right and he'll end up with you in the long run, but you have to let him be. If he should just decide to stay with painting, you just have to accept it. Why, he's a new person since he's at Nassau. He comes home every day chock full of stories about friends and classes and amusing little anecdotes. Even his very first week, he was laughing about how when he first registered at the school, his office had his first and last names reversed." Mr. Irving chuckled in spite of himself. "I guess that would make him Irving Simon." The smile faded. "Irving Simon? But that's Simon!" It was after 4 when Simon finally arrived home, bone-weary, still aching from the Neanderthal sandwich, and completely drenched with beer. In one night, he had taken off more weight from sheer terror than the bean diet had managed in almost 3 weeks. The police had cleared Scuzz out around 2 a.m., but as was his custom, Johnny decided to take the later train, and he and Simon had to take a leisurely stroll through unsafe neighborhoods. Simon was most sincerely surprised to have arrived home alive. His parents were waiting in the doorway, which was expected at this hour. He'd probably catch a little bit of a lecture, but they would be so glad that nothing had happened to him that everything would blow over. Yes, he could see the anxious relief on his mother's face, a typical staying out too late rap, nothing too heavy. His father's appearance puzzled him a little. His face was bright purple, and there were beads of sweat on his forehead, but he wore a huge artificial grin that looked almost painful to maintain. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Sorry I'm so late." "Thank goodness you're home," his mother rushed up to embrace him. "Simon, I smell beer." "Hi, son," Mr. Irving greeted, his voice somewhat distorted by the oblivious effort of maintaining his ridiculous smile. "Dad, are you all right?" asked Simon in concern. "You're sweating and you're all blue." "Young man," challenged his mother, "you reek of beer." "Yeah, I know, Mom. Someone spilled an octo on me." "You'll be pleased to know, son," the stiffness of his grin still contorting his whole glowing countenance, "that we made a major breakthrough today. We found out how I, Simon, disappear from all records. What's an octo? His mother persisted. 8 mugs of beer. Aha! You've been drinking! I haven't, Mom. It's just on my clothes. How did it get on your clothes? Just a minute, Mom. Hang on a sec. He turned back to his father. You were saying? I was just saying that Simon, never really disappeared. He just changed his name to Simon I. Simon's breath caught in his throat. All the unpleasantness of the evening suddenly shriveled to nothing and was replaced by anticipation of unpleasantness to come. Simon had been discovered. The jig was up.